When President Franklin Roosevelt needed someone to rebuild the United States Navy after Pearl Harbor, he chose a man feared by everyone around him, Admiral Ernest Joseph King. Known for his volcanic temper, relentless standards, and unyielding ruthlessness, King was not just a commander. He was a human weapon forged for war. The Navy was shattered. The Pacific Fleet lay in ruins after December 7th, 1941. The Japanese threat loomed across the Pacific, from the Philippines to the Solomon Islands. America needed leadership capable of transforming disaster into triumph. King's methods were extreme, but Roosevelt understood one truth. Victory demanded brutality, and King was brutal enough to deliver. Ernest Joseph King was born November 23, 1878, in Lorain, Ohio. His father was a Scottish immigrant and railroad foreman. His mother, English, raised him in strict Calvinist discipline. From childhood, King displayed a stubborn candor. At 7, he refused a pie he disliked, telling the hostess bluntly, "I don't like it." This absolute honesty, no matter how confrontational, became his hallmark. King entered the Naval Academy, graduating 4th in the class of 1901. Already he demonstrated the combative personality that would both define and endanger his career. Early assignments aboard the USS Cincinnati in the Asiatic Fleet revealed a man prone to excess, frequenting bars with enlisted men, hosting women aboard ship, and openly challenging authority. Punishments came, including confinement under hatches and nomination for dismissal. But the Navy saw potential in King, particularly through Rear Admiral Charles Stockton, who recognized that beneath the disciplinary wreckage lay extraordinary talent. King survived, and from that moment he deliberately reshaped his personality into the commander the Navy needed. Tough, ruthless, and unrelenting. King's early career demonstrated both brilliance and volatility. At 48, he earned his wings as Naval Aviator number 3368, completing flight training at Pensacola. He commanded submarine divisions, oversaw dramatic salvage operations such as that of the sunken S-51, and led the aircraft carrier Lexington. His reputation for operational excellence was matched only by personal excess. Wild parties, notorious affairs, and relentless pursuit of pleasures that shocked his subordinates. Yet alongside these vices, King demanded, and often achieved, extraordinary results. Officers feared him, but they also respected the transformative power of his leadership. If you're fascinated by how a single man could rebuild an entire navy while terrifying everyone around him, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Who in today's military could match King's relentless style? King's philosophy was simple. Fear is a tool, not a byproduct. Officers who hesitated, who failed to perform flawlessly, faced his fury. Those who excelled were scrutinized and pressured relentlessly to improve further. King centralized authority, refused to apologize, and believed constant pressure ensured readiness. He lived aboard the USS Dauntless, a converted luxury yacht, where his staff endured militarily precise routines. Wake at 6:30, daily intelligence briefings at 9, strict office discipline, and rigorous staff meetings designed to test knowledge under psychological pressure. King's temper was unpredictable. Officers approached him as they would an unexploded bomb, never certain when an eruption would occur. Yet his method produced results. By 1940, King had achieved flag rank, and under his command, the Navy would rebuild from a post-Pearl Harbor nadir to dominate 2 oceans simultaneously. His choices of subordinates, Admirals Nimitz, Halsey, Spruance, demonstrated strategic brilliance even amidst a climate of fear. King's life illustrates a paradox: personally loathed, yet professionally indispensable. His personal vices, excessive drinking, affairs, and theatrical rage, coexisted with extraordinary competence. He reshaped a shattered navy into a war-winning machine. Roosevelt's decision to keep him in command was deliberate. King was essential because he was merciless. Admiral Ernest Joseph King did not rise to the top of the United States Navy by chance. By 1942, the Pacific Fleet was in crisis. Pearl Harbor had left battleships sunk, airfields destroyed, and morale shattered. Japan's carriers prowled the Pacific, threatening the Philippines, Wake Island, and the Solomon Islands. Roosevelt needed a commander capable of transforming disaster into victory, someone unafraid to push men beyond limits. King's reputation for brutality, unpredictability, and relentless standards made him uniquely qualified. He moved with purpose, assessing the Navy's shattered structure, identifying weaknesses in personnel, training, and logistics. King centralized authority, placing critical decisions firmly in his hands. Officers who hesitated, who doubted, or who failed to meet his exacting standards were immediately tested, corrected, or replaced. Fear was not a byproduct. It was a tool of command. The Navy had never seen leadership like this. King demanded initiative, but he demanded absolute accountability. By March 1942, training schedules were intensified, gunnery drills were doubled, and carrier exercises ran almost non-stop. King personally oversaw each step, visiting ships, inspecting readiness, and noting failures with surgical precision. Early victories in the Pacific, like the Doolittle Raid, were shaped by King's insistence on operational excellence. He ensured aircraft carriers were ready, crews trained, and intelligence fully integrated. Yet King's leadership extended beyond operations. It was psychological. Officers learned to anticipate his unpredictable temper. Every meeting, every briefing was an examination. Hesitation could mean humiliation, but overperformance led to even higher expectations. King's philosophy was clear. The Navy must dominate not only through firepower, but through mental discipline. His staff aboard the USS Dauntless endured strict routines, waking at 6:30, daily intelligence briefings at 9, and disciplined office hours until late afternoon. Those who struggled faced his wrath immediately. Every flaw, every oversight was amplified to maintain the pressure that he believed forged excellence. King's brilliance was matched by his strategic foresight. He had predicted vulnerabilities in Pearl Harbor years before the attack, running mock exercises that demonstrated how carriers and air power would determine the Pacific conflict. His choices of subordinates were deliberate. Nimitz, Halsey, and Spruance were selected not only for skill, but for their ability to execute under extreme pressure. King created a chain of command that could act decisively, without hesitation, in the face of overwhelming Japanese aggression. Yet his methods were polarizing. Officers both feared and admired him. General Douglas MacArthur considered him inflexible, controlling, and at times dangerously aggressive. British commanders found him blunt and intolerant. Roosevelt, however, understood the necessity of King's style. Victory demanded ruthless efficiency, and King delivered it. By mid-1942, King had transformed the Navy from a defeated, demoralized force into a machine capable of challenging Japan across 2 oceans simultaneously. He enforced strict standards across every fleet division: gunnery accuracy, navigation, aircraft readiness, and crew discipline. Intelligence was centralized under his control. Cryptanalysis and reconnaissance reports were integrated into operations swiftly, leaving no gap for Japanese maneuver. King understood that in modern naval warfare, speed, coordination, and decisive action were the difference between survival and annihilation. His insistence on accountability, even at the cost of personal relationships, created friction but also results. Officers learned to anticipate his expectations and, over time, exceeded them. The paradox of King's command was evident in both war and personal conduct. He drank heavily, pursued personal pleasures, and held grudges, yet his professional achievements were extraordinary. The Navy's ability to launch major operations, from Midway to Guadalcanal, depended on the discipline and readiness he imposed. King's oversight extended to logistics, personnel assignments, and technological innovation. Aircraft carriers were upgraded, submarines repositioned strategically, and aircrew rotations optimized for maximum efficiency. Every decision reflected his obsession with maintaining superiority over the Japanese fleet. Even allies recognized the power and danger of his leadership. British Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke clashed with King over strategic priorities, nearly coming to blows. Officers learned that personal intimidation was part of the job, but the results justified the method. Admiral Halsey wrote later that serving under King was both terrifying and educational. The Navy rebuilt, not through consensus or diplomacy, but through the imposition of fear, structure, and relentless expectation. King demanded results, and the Navy delivered. By the end of 1942, the Pacific Fleet had regained its offensive capacity. Carriers could launch strikes hundreds of miles away. Submarines disrupted Japanese supply lines. Pilots trained under grueling schedules flew with precision and confidence. Every victory, every maneuver was shaped by King's unyielding leadership. His style was controversial, his methods extreme, but the Navy under King's command became the instrument of American victory in the Pacific. By 1943, Admiral Ernest Joseph King had solidified his reputation as the most formidable leader in the United States Navy. His methods had been tested under fire, and the results were undeniable. The Navy, once shattered and demoralized after Pearl Harbor, now dominated the Pacific. Carrier task forces struck with precision. Submarines disrupted Japanese supply lines. Amphibious operations were coordinated across thousands of miles of ocean with near-perfect timing. Every maneuver reflected King's obsession with control, discipline, and results. Officers still feared him, but they also respected the machine he had created. The paradox of King was clear. He could terrify and inspire in the same instant. King's leadership style shaped the outcome of key battles, from Midway to the Solomon Islands and beyond. He understood that victory required more than ships and planes. It required coordination, speed, and unflinching resolve. When the Guadalcanal campaign began, King insisted that carriers, battleships, and air power work together seamlessly. Supply lines were reinforced under his scrutiny. Intelligence reports were acted upon immediately, often preventing disasters before they occurred. Under King's watch, the Navy learned to operate as a single, relentless organism. Mistakes were punished swiftly, but innovation was encouraged if it served results. He demanded initiative, but he demanded accountability even more. Every subordinate understood the stakes. Failure was not tolerated. Excellence was expected. Even outside the immediate command, King's influence was felt. Allies learned to navigate his temperament, understanding that disagreement could provoke anger, but compliance and efficiency earned trust. British commanders, American generals, and political leaders all knew that King's decisions were final. Roosevelt relied on him because he was both unyielding and effective. The victories in the Pacific were not simply a matter of chance. They were the product of a man who had remade himself into a weapon of war. King's personal discipline, daily routines aboard the USS Dauntless, and relentless supervision of training ensured the Navy's operational superiority. Yet King was more than a tyrant. He was a strategist and innovator. He had long recognized the importance of aircraft carriers in modern naval warfare. Under his command, carrier groups became the spearhead of American operations. Pilots trained under harsh schedules performed with deadly precision. Mechanics and crews were drilled constantly. Ships operated at maximum efficiency. King centralized intelligence, ensuring that information reached the right hands instantly. Cryptanalysis, reconnaissance, and code breaking were fully integrated into operations. The Navy was no longer reacting. It was dictating the pace of the war. King's personal contradictions were as famous as his professional accomplishments. He could be indulgent in personal pleasures, throwing wild parties and pursuing romances, yet he enforced absolute discipline in command. Officers who failed to meet expectations felt his wrath, while those who excelled were pushed even further. His philosophy was clear. Only through unrelenting pressure could the Navy achieve peak performance. By 1944, his approach had produced results unmatched in American history. Task forces operated with lethal precision. Enemy supply lines were devastated. The Japanese Navy, once dominant in the Pacific, struggled to respond effectively. King's vision of an unstoppable, coordinated naval machine had become reality. The final paradox of King's career was that he was both feared and indispensable. Historians continue to debate whether his style would be acceptable today, but there is no doubt it was effective. Roosevelt's decision to keep him in command reflected a deep understanding of what victory required. A commander who would demand the impossible and enforce it relentlessly. King's legacy is evident not only in the victories of the Pacific War, but in the institutional culture he shaped. The Navy learned that fear, discipline, and rigorous standards could produce extraordinary results. By the end of World War II, Ernest Joseph King had overseen a Navy that controlled 2 oceans, dominated the air and sea, and delivered decisive victories across the Pacific. His leadership style was harsh, his methods extreme, but the Navy under King was a war-winning instrument of power. King had transformed disaster into triumph, fear into efficiency, and a shattered fleet into a machine capable of defeating the most formidable naval adversary the United States had ever faced. In the history of military command, few figures are as polarizing, effective, or unforgettable. Admiral Ernest Joseph King was essential because he was merciless. He was feared, but he delivered, and the Navy and the world owed its victories to a man who deliberately made himself the ultimate weapon.